2, 1.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my privilege to welcome you to number 26 in our nonprofit empowerment webinar series. And today, I'm especially excited about our guest and topic, and it's about the heart of the community. Basically, we have three objectives today. Number one, we want to give you a United Way update straight from the top. We want to talk a little about available resources, and then we're going to emphasize collaborate like your life depends on it. I have to share a little bias. I've been a long time United Way fan. During my 3 higher education gigs, I was the campaign liaison, and I've never seen a more efficient team than the United Way of San Antonio and Bexar County. They always had my back. They wouldn't let me fail. I tried, but they wouldn't let me fail. And by the way, at this point, I'm going to give them a fuller introduction, but I would like to bring on Chris Martin, who is the CEO and president of United Way of San Antonio and Bexar County. Chris, let me ask you first, how is the Martin family doing?
Great, thanks for asking, Jim, and happy to be here. Everybody's doing well and healthy, so in moments like these, I think that's all we can ask for.
If my math serves me correctly, this is the 80th anniversary of the United Way in San Antonio. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, our 80th year of operating here in San Antonio and Bexar.
Y'all started at 1940, and I'd like to be again. I stepped into consulting a couple of years ago, but I know 2 of the team members who always had my back are still there. I want to give a shout out to Linda Garza, who I'm just jealous of how easily she could exercise. We were at Gold's Gym together. And Chris Tyler, who I think you promoted from technology to some other area, and he was a great guy to work with. And I think she finally retired last year. Mary Salazar always supported our success. And what I like about the United Way, Chris, I think, you know, I live my life for philanthropy, and I think as much as any organization, United Way brings out the very best in all of us. So thank you. I'm going to describe you a little more fully, but you're basically a United Way lifer, and I say that with affection. Is that correct?
I am. I've spent more than 30 years in the United Way network, and this is, I think, this is now my
you don't seem
city.
You don't seem to have enough gray hair to have spent 30 years in the United Way system, but that's a different issue. For the United Way and for our nonprofit friends, this is a time of challenge because there's a conundrum that at the same time that we see needs rising, our resources are challenged. And Chris, we know that nonprofits are no stranger to financial pressures. Okay, and every nonprofit CEO I ever worked with was an expert in stretching a nickel into a dime. Guess what? They got to stretch that nickel into a quarter now. And this is a difficult time because we all share something, folks, and that is there's a lot more that we don't know than we do know, okay? Chris, there's about 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. There's 100,000 in the great state of Texas, and there is 6,000 in San Antonio, which probably most of them been knocking at your door over the last couple of years. And the truth is, most of the nonprofits are very modest in size. The great majority have revenues under $500,000, and that's true for the situation in San Antonio. But whether you're a huge nonprofit like United Way Worldwide or just a local one, you share something, and that is you are fueled by passion. And we are so lucky to have a combination of CEOs, directors of development, board chairs, board members, volunteers, and donors. And they all share something. They are driven by passion for their cause, and they remind us that indeed one person can make a difference. I spent the morning watching some of the ceremonies for the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I love Justice Roberts was speaking, and he said, you know, Justice Ginsburg, her mother was a very modest bookkeeper in Brooklyn, never got a college education. And the difference between her and her daughter, who became a Supreme Court justice that changed history, probably, I'm sorry, but as much as anyone in recent time promoted gender inequality, the difference was one generation. That happens in America, folks. And we like to say when nonprofits do well, we all do well. And because I don't care what role you're in, you're the receptionist, I like to call the director of first impressions. You're like Chris, the CEO, or you're the board chair, or you're just a volunteer, not just volunteers. Volunteers are fantastic. You touch, improve, and save more lives. And we like to say, before COVID, you were playing an essential role, and now what you're doing is more essential than ever. Chris, we have a little tradition. Early in this show, I want everyone to type in those 3 words, nonprofit strong. Chris, what are we?
Nonprofit strong.
You got that right. And we're stronger together. I had the privilege of working for 3 different institutions of higher education. And I also had the privilege of working with business and community leaders who are absolutely fearless in everything they did. And Chris would appreciate this as a former vice president of development, except for asking for a gift. And what do we know about fear? Most of fear is based on fear of the unknown. And so in June of 2018, my wife Andrea and I and our 2 cats formed Eskin Fundraising Training to declare war on the fear of asking for a gift. And we think we can take any nonprofit board member or staff member or volunteer that has passion for their cause and shares the Jeffersonian virtues of a knowing head and an honest heart, and we can turn them into a fundraiser. This is number 26 in our series, and we're really excited about the programs we're going to have. We plan to go virtually every Wednesday until the end of the year. This is our slot, 4 to 5 p.m. And again, nonprofits are welcome. And we like to think of ourselves, Chris, as a learning community. And I like to call about 2020 vision. You see an eyelid, but I use the letter I. We're here to inform, to inspire, and to intertwine. And that is how we can support each other's success. That's going to be a big focus of our dialogue with Chris. We do a monthly newsletter. We're going to send out, first of all, we're going to put on Facebook and LinkedIn a very brief written summary of the discussion. And then John Largent, who I haven't even recognized. John, what happened? I'm going to bring you in a little late. Ever since our first webinar, the producer has been my good friend, John Largent, who is CEO of Game Day Media. I worry about everything, Chris, but thanks to John, I don't worry about technology. John, could you take a moment to explain particularly how people can type in questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And thank you for attending today's webinar. I would like to let you know that if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A bubble, or if you want to raise your hand And we can actually, if you have availability, we can actually have you come on screen if you have a camera, or we can hear your voice. And I think we've done that the last few weeks with great success. And it's really, the questions are great to be typed out, but it's even better to hear your voice and see you, so that we can answer those questions directly. So if you have any questions, be sure to raise your hands, and we'll get to you when that process starts toward the bottom of the hour. Thanks, Jim.
Right. And again, thank you, John, for being such a wonderful partner in this series. We put out a monthly newsletter called Strategies. And by the way, you're going to receive, after our little summary, John does a magic spin cycle, and then he edits the tape. And so we'll be posting the recording and slides. And if you're not in our database, all you have to do is click on this slide here. It'll be a PDF, and we'll add you to the database. And not only will you receive the monthly newsletter, but you will receive an invitation to each of these webinars. And we want you to be part of our learning community. I was proud last year to write my first book. It wasn't long. It seemed like it took a long time to write. It's only 80 pages, and I've tried to distill the simplicity of fundraising. I'm with a guest, and I love to see people from a fundraising background get promoted to CEO. Thanks. I want to see more of that, Chris. But something we were learned on, that face-to-face meetings were the gold standard in fundraising, particularly when you were asking for major gifts. And that has changed. Social distancing has changed fundraising in a dramatic way, but really we're saying the components are the same. That's identifying who you're going to ask for money, forging a personal and emotional relationship between your prospect and the mission of your organization, the who, what, and where, and when of how you ask, and finally the stewardship. That remains the same. We just now have to do that virtually. And we're going to talk a little about that today. Guess what? We are getting all sorts of affirmation that virtual fundraising works. And Chris, and when you and I were schooled in it, we were taught you got to get face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball, with the donor. We're getting eyeball to eyeball, but we're using technology to do that. It is my great pleasure to formally introduce our guest, Chris Martin, who has been president and CEO of the United Way of San Antonio and Bexar County since 2018. He spent close to 30 years in the great city of Cincinnati, where he was their vice president of development. So I love CEOs that appreciate fundraising. So welcome, Chris. And if it's okay, I'd like to start with our questions.
Sure, sounds great. Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here with the group.
Okay. And thank you. And thank you. Let me just say, we need the United Way at all times, particularly in times of need. We've never had times of such profound need. And I just want to express our appreciation for the leadership and the support that United Way is providing at this moment of profound challenges and needs. Thank you. Okay, let me ask you first kind of an operational question. How is the United Way handling the challenge of working through COVID-19? Do you have employees working remotely at home? Are they coming to the office and socially distanced? Is it a hybrid? How are you all working?
Great question, and for us, it's been a little bit of everything. And I think I probably need to start by saying that we are working and operating just like everybody else is, and that's part of that was trying to figure this out day to day and what that meant for us and what that meant for our organization and what it meant for our constituents and most importantly what it meant for our community. And so we're at a stage now where back in March, just like so many others, we began the work remote process and transitioned to about 50% of our employees we actually throughout have had people in the building because of our United Way 211 center. Because of 211, it's a 24/7 helpline. We had to have people on premise the entire time in order to take calls. But we transitioned most of our other workforce work remote. We've been able to since then make work remote available for our 211 folks. We were able to build that capability in a short period of time in partnership with the state, who's one of the funders of 211. But we really began to transition about 50% of our workforce back into the building in mid-June, mid-June. And so we're at about 50%. So we have people that are here a week and then they're remote a week, and then the other portion of the employees come in. And obviously we've been sensitive to anybody that has any health needs that need to be taken care of. We certainly don't want to put anybody in a compromising position. And the health of our employees is critical. We can't do our work if we don't have healthy people.
Well, would you extend our appreciation? Your team truly are heroes in our community. We need them. We needed them all the time, and their roles could not be more crucial than they are right now. Please convey our appreciation. They're heroes in our book. Chris, we're going to spend most of the time talking about COVID-19, but I wanted you to take a minute to talk about the United Way's response to social injustice.
Sure, happy to do so. I think, for me, the two topics are so intertwined. Intertwined being one of those words you mentioned before, but if you really think about the COVID pandemic, it really was just one of the ways that a spotlight has been shining on the social injustice and the inequities that exist in our community and in so many communities across our country and across the globe for that matter. And from a United Way perspective, as we over the course of the last 2 years, we've made some transitions with our funding model. We began to develop priorities where we really began to ask that question of where are we going to put a stake in the ground as an organization? What is it that we're going to fund? What are the strategies that we're going to fund that will hopefully move our community to a higher level of moving the needle and really thinking about community level metrics? And two of the areas that we're focused on through this transition have been providing educational opportunities for all people in our community and providing economic opportunities for all people in our community. And because of that transition, it really has positioned us to be a strong contributor to helping our community move forward when we think about inequity and what we need to do as a community, the issues that we need to address in our community in order to be as strong as we can possibly be. And so that transition has positioned us well. We will also recognize that we will lead where we need to lead, and we will support where we need to support. I think those are two important roles for any organization as I think about what it is that we're trying to accomplish in the future.
Chris, I'm sorry, there are going to be a lot of tough questions. First of all, how is the United Way dealing with the awesome challenge of deciding, allocating finite resources during this time of such profound need?
Another great question. And, Jim, for us, this transition in the funding model that we really began to undergo that transition over the course of the last 2.5, 3 years, might even been a little bit longer, because we started by looking at the issues that were important in our community and the issues that were affecting many, many people in our community. And that helped us really boil down to priorities. And as we started to prioritize our work to the best of our ability and recognize that there was a revenue stream that had challenges as the economic makeup of our community and our country was changing. It challenged a little bit of the United Way business model, and we needed to think differently about that. And but I probably need to say that first and foremost, this transition for us was driven by the numbers of people impacted by the serious issues that our community faces, the social issues that our community faces. And that forced us to prioritize. And that's how we're dealing with challenged resources and how we're dealing with finite resources. You've got to identify what your priorities are. And quite frankly, I would even argue not only do you go through that first process of identifying what your priorities are, you probably have to identify what your next set of priorities are from there, right? You narrow it down once, you probably need to narrow it down again and think about what that means. Ultimately, it's about how do we have the greatest impact and where do we think we can have the greatest impact by making the right investments, and you do that with limited resources. So that's been our approach to this, and we're very fortunate that we went through a little bit of that process pre-COVID, and we'll continue to go through those, to experience that and go through that type of process as we go forward. We want to make the most strategic investments that we can possibly make as an organization.
Chris, you've devoted more than 30 years to the noble mission of the United Way, and you've seen United Ways around the country, particularly Cincinnati. How would you compare and contrast our situation in San Antonio in coping with the crisis with other parts of the country?
Well, so what I would probably say to you to start is we're probably no different than in any other community as it relates to the fact that this crisis came on, and I don't know how many were truly prepared to deal with this from a community perspective. I don't know that anybody could argue that they were fully prepared to deal with the pandemic. I don't know that there are many organizations that they could probably accurately state or honestly state that they were truly prepared. And so what I've seen is people have become much more adaptable, have become much more nimble. I've been very fortunate throughout this. I've been on calls with my peers from some of the major cities across the country throughout. And so we're learning from one another, and we're learning how we've all adapted and dealt with things. And one of the very early things that we did here in San Antonio is just one example. With our agency partners, we immediately began to talk to them about what they were experiencing, started to learn from what they were experiencing. And so one of our early actions was to provide flexibility in the funding that we were providing to them that we had already committed to them. But we recognized that, if their doors weren't open, if they weren't strong as an organization, their ability to meet the needs of their clients, to meet the needs of this community, and to deliver on the things that we had agreed to invest in would be very limited, if non-existent. So we immediately went to them and offered flexible funding. And that was one of the learnings that other communities took away from us. They began to think about what that looked like for them. So every situation certainly has been unique, but I would also tell you that the consistency was very few were fully prepared to deal with this. Very few, if any.
Yeah. Chris, at the beginning of the show, we said collaborate, collaborate, and collaborate. From your perspective, what advice do you have for nonprofit leaders in fostering a culture of mutual support and assistance?
Well, first thing I would say is we all need to probably look in the mirror and ask ourselves, have we been having conversations with the other nonprofits that might be integral to our work or somehow integrated with our work? And have we just had conversations to check in and see how people work? And that's one of the things I'll give our team credit for here. Very early on, they began to call our agency partners, and it started with a simple, how are you doing, right? And how is everybody on your team doing? And so just to kind of take a little bit of that edge off that existed for all of us. Everybody had that, right? I mean, I don't know that anybody could say that they didn't. But to be able to just remove that as a barrier and just to break that down and begin to have conversation and ultimately asking that question of how can we help? what can we do to be supportive of you because you're important to this community? And so it probably starts with dialogue, right? I mean, I think to say, yes, we're going to support the rest of the nonprofits in the community, but you have to have that dialogue around what that looks like, and how you can work together. And, you know, some of the times, and I know we may talk about this a little bit later, but sometimes that means letting your guard down a little bit, right? I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
you know, you got to let that guard down a little bit to have productive conversations. And I think that that's what we saw early on in this. And just, it starts with having that conversation.
Yeah. Hey, staying on that same theme, how do you suggest nonprofits consider teaming up to make joint requests to funders?
Great question, Jim. And I'll start with, you know, the fact that when we went through our last funding transition and our RFP process back, you know, a little over a year and a half ago, well, really about 2 years ago now, I should say. When we went through that, we had one of the things that we did was we had a measure that we basically said that we were only going to accept joint requests and joint applications for that measure because we felt that we needed, the work needed to be done by multiple organizations. So, and we did have some that may have applied as an individual organization, but ultimately it was those that applied together that really were most seriously considered for funding in that space where that was. And what we saw was that dialogue started by thinking about what the higher level goal was for that program, for that request. So what is it that we're all trying to accomplish together, collectively? And then what is it that we, as one of the applicants or one of the participants or one of the partners in this work, how is it that we contribute? And how is it that we bring our strengths and assets to the table to achieve those higher level goals? And by the way, it's probably important to recognize that when we do that, we do strengthen ourselves. It's, you know, we do improve the work that we're doing because we begin to learn from others that may be doing things a little bit better than us. They may be a little bit stronger in one space than we are. And if you're in this as partners, you're learning from one another throughout. And so
Right.
I think it really is, you've got to start with that high level goal. What do we all agree is important? What do we all agree that we're trying to accomplish? What is it that we can contribute to accomplishing that? How are we going to measure our success? And then how do we learn from others and continuously improve what we're doing?
Yeah. Chris, no easy questions. What advice do you have for nonprofit leaders in making really hard decisions on achieving budget savings?
Well, I go back to, you know, certainly we've all had to think about this, right? Every one of us has had to think about what that looked like for us. And first and foremost, you certainly have to go back to mission, right? You've got to look at mission and, you know, making sure that the budget decisions that you make are consistent with what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. And I think you also need to go back to looking at what your priorities are. You know, what are the priorities for the organization? Are there things, this is an opportunity to really think about, are there things that we're doing right now that might not be in our wheelhouse, that might not be the right things for us to be doing right now? And so if we're going to make cuts, how do we make the right cuts? How do we make, you know, strategic decisions and reduce our budgets in the right areas that don't weaken us as an organization, and certainly hold true to the mission that we've all you know, that we're all committed to accomplishing as people within the organization.
That tracks perfectly into our next question. You know, typically payroll accounts for 2/3 to 3/4 of a nonprofit's expenditures. Do you recommend nonprofits consider eliminating specific positions or maybe cutting salaries and benefits across the board? why don't we put you on the spot, right?
I think what I would tell you is you have to be smart and strategic. And across the board, it probably lends itself to a little bit of how do we share the pain, as opposed to how do we get as smart and as strategic as we possibly can, and cut based on our priorities. And if you've already made those reductions where you are down to the core priorities of the organization, the core work that you're trying to accomplish in your organization, then maybe across the board is something that gets considered. But I would argue that you really need to start. It goes back to that last question, right? It goes back to, do we understand what our priorities are? Are they all mission related? And let's think about how this fits into not only our short-term strategy of getting past the crisis, but our long-term strategy of stabilizing and becoming a stronger organization and a stronger community. So, it's really, I don't know that there's a one size fits all, but I think it has to start with strategy and start with priorities.
Chris, do you think it's realistic for a nonprofit to consider replacing staff positions with volunteers?
I think that's challenging. I think a lot depends on what that means when you ask that question. Does that mean that you're going to have a volunteer in your office full-time doing the job just as if they were paid, or does it mean that you're going to have multiple people trying to accomplish some of the objectives of the organization? I think it's probably important to recognize that most strong nonprofits are being supported and built around a strong staff that engages a passionate group of volunteers to help supplement that work and to help lead that work and to help guide that work. So to say that we can replace day-to-day management of a nonprofit or day-to-day work of a nonprofit with the volunteers, that's a hard question to answer. And we do have United Ways in this country in very small communities that are actually volunteer led, and there aren't staff people. And I will tell you that those United Ways, without fail, typically are in the organizations that going back to that original slide, that are less than $500,000. I mean, you're talking about organizations that may be raising $80,000 a year for their community, and oftentimes in rural communities. But the bottom line is they're small enough where I think that they're able to do that.
Chris, you're from a development background, and like me, that fundraising is always emphasized face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball interaction, particularly when asking for major gifts. We are beginning to hear about positive results from virtual solicitations. What's your experience been?
Well, as you might imagine, let me start by saying, I thought this was the new face-to-face, right? We have, as a country, we have transitioned. Actually, so much throughout the world has transitioned to doing what we're doing today, and so, as you might imagine, with us having a number of just about entering our annual campaign season. We're actually in the middle of it now. We had to transition quickly. So we've had to create, group meetings, on the fly. We've had to create virtual experiences for our donor base. We've had to create virtual engagement for our major donors. And what we have seen is, number one, I think it has, we've had more people participate because it's become easier for them. Right? When you think about group sessions, we've had individual conversations through Zoom. We're willing to do it all at this stage and do whatever it takes to engage that donor. And we've had some success with it. I know a number of others have had some success with it. And ultimately, we all know that we'll get back to that day when we can sit across the table or next to them at the table and have that dialogue with them about what that looks like. But until then, you know, we're going to do what's best for all involved. And that's the approach.
Yeah. Chris, I told you no easy questions, right? So what is your advice to individual philanthropists, to foundations, to corporations who have to make those difficult funding decisions, not between the good and the bad, but between the good and the good?
Great question. And, you know, certainly making those funding decisions, so much of it goes back to early on. I talked about, you know, I look at our role not just as a funder from a United Way perspective, but from that funding perspective, it came back to priorities. Because believe me, when we made decisions around our funding, we had to make some really hard decisions. Our volunteers made really tough decisions to fund programs and then to not fund programs that were good as well. We had some great proposals that were not funded because we had limited resources. So again, it went back to the priorities. It went back to asking that question of, can we work together as partners with these organizations to achieve what we want to achieve? And oh, by the way, do that at the scale that we want to achieve it at. And so it's really going back and staying true to what you're trying to accomplish. And much of that is steeped in priority, steeped in objective, and steeped in desire to have maximum impact in a community.
Each time you lead perfectly into my next question. Would you advise nonprofit leaders to revisit mission statements, strategic plans, and priorities in response to the COVID crisis?
You know, certainly have to revisit everything that we're doing, right? I think when you're in a crisis, when you're, again, nobody anticipated a pandemic. You know, for us, we were literally in the middle of wrapping up a strategic planning process that began last year, late last year, and then the pandemic hit, and it became evident that it was going to impact our entire community and our entire world, for that matter. And so we were in from a strategic planning perspective, we were in a prime position to really reevaluate the things that we had laid out, because we had just laid them out. There was much of the thought that was still, you know, fresh in everybody's head, and the volunteers, you know, really looked at that. Did it force us to change some things in that plan? Absolutely. To think differently about some of the things. And again, things just as simple as making sure that we were technologically proficient and prepared. So many of us went into this, and us included, that we were not as strong from a technology standpoint back in February. I will tell you that right now. But you know, we knew that we needed to find a way to ramp that up, and we've been very fortunate to build that muscle and to become much more technologically proficient. And now we know that we'll continue to do that. We can get better at it as we go forward, and we will get better at it as we go forward. And, you know, really happy with our team here to see the way people adjusted, and to see the way people saw the need to strengthen that and to get better at it and to constantly improve at it. And in fact, I had one of our partners emailed me last night and said, you know, I've been doing United Way campaigns for 40 plus years, and I've got to tell you, we're just wrapping up our first week of our campaign, and the assets that your team was able to provide us were undoubtedly among some of the best I've seen to this point in making sure that we were going to be successful on behalf of this community. So, you know, I feel good about when you get feedback like that. You know, that's great to hear, but what I'll also tell you, my response was, what can we do better? Nice, thanks for the feedback, but what can we do better? We've got to find a way to do better, and we will. And we will improve on that.
Chris, before we check on questions from the audience, I wanted to be sure to include this question. how can people support the success of the United Way of San Antonio and Bexar County with gifts of time and money?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for asking that. You know, what I would tell you is, first and foremost, I would ask people that may or may not know much about us other than the name, start by understanding the work that we're doing. I think start by learning about the work that we're doing and recognize where that fits into your passions and to your wheelhouse and to what's important to you. Because I think there's a, you know, while we can't be all things to all people, I think there's a slice of our work that really does fit with so many in our community. So start by understanding. Certainly visit our website, and we're continuing to look at how we improve that. This has really kind of brought that to the forefront for us, that we need to ramp that up, and we are doing that rather rapidly, actually. But you know, visit the website. There's a place to give there. There's a place to volunteer there. You know, there are a number of sites that you can link through there that will show you the volunteer opportunities, but also show you the you know, show you a place to be able to make a gift. And you know, if that doesn't work for you, if that's not easy for you, certainly call our office. We'll make sure that we take care of you know, of the people to help them with that. Or call me for that matter. I certainly will facilitate that.
Okay, well, Chris, we're doing great on time. I like your pace. John, do we have any questions from the audience? I still have some more questions, but I want to invite the audience in.
Yes, I do have a question from Harvey, and I'm going to bring him into the conversation.
Uh-huh. Well, Chris, as we know, when you hear the name Harvey in San Antonio, it's just one Harvey. And he's a good one.
Mr. Najum, can you hear us? He must be having trouble. He did type in the question as well. So let me pull that up real quick.
And while you're doing that, I know Chris would mirror me. Can I, just before you do get into his question, no matter what it is, when I think about somebody with philanthropic vision, commitment, and leadership, I think the name Harvey Najum.
Yes, he wanted to ask about the SA Area Foundation and how that process went, and also money raised for child care for essential workers.
Sure, happy to share. You know, one of the things that this webinar, one of the topics of the questions was about collaboration, and that was actually the partnership with the Area Foundation was one of the collaboratives early on in the COVID response that our United Way was a part of, and it really stemmed from a conversation that I had with Margie French at the Area Foundation, who's become not only a great friend, but a great partner to work with since I've been here in San Antonio, and truly appreciate her and what the Area Foundation does. And early on, we came together and had that conversation around how can we respond together as a community with other funders, and we did that, and we were able to, you know, we did that, and we were able to raise more than $7 million for nonprofits in this community to be responsive during the crisis. And it was really about quickly responding. So, you know, literally got to the point where money was coming in the door on Monday. We had it out the door on Tuesday and Thursday of the same week, so that we were, you know, able to help nonprofits. And I think all in all, more than 170 nonprofits received that money through a grant process, and it was a rapid response process. It was a short grant process. We did not, you know, we did not want to overburden nonprofits with a bunch of questions. We just needed to know that the money was needed, the money was going to be put to good use, and the money was going to have an impact in our community. And I think we, you know, in partnership with the Area Foundation and other funders, did that very well. And as you might imagine, we had a number of funders that stepped forward on that. And then also a couple other things that we did as a United Way. immediately we started to see that one of the needs early on in this crisis was the need for childcare, especially for those essential workers. The people that had to go to work every day in our community, pick the industry, whether it be healthcare or the grocery stores, whatever it might have been, where they were essential workers. And we wanted to make sure for them that when they showed up at the office or at the store or whatever that might have been, or at the hospital, fire station, police station, whatever it may have been, we wanted to make sure that they had peace of mind as it related to their kids. And we wanted to make sure that their kids had access to the childcare that they needed. So we were able to raise money and fund childcare assistance for essential workers for a 3-week period of time. So essential workers had an opportunity to apply to receive up to 3 weeks of childcare paid for through scholarships by United Way and in partnership with other funders, including the city, the Area Foundation, and a few others. So that was one of the early responses as well. And then another was a program that called Get Shift Done, and it was focused on our hospitality industry, where we had people that were furloughed, that we had people that were laid off. And we knew that we had a need in our community to have volunteers at food distribution sites. We had a volunteer shortage because people didn't necessarily want to go out and do the things that they were doing prior to the pandemic. So we were able to pay a wage to the furloughed and laid off hospitality industry workers, place them at food distribution sites, and we were able to put food in the hands of people that needed it. And so we really met 3 needs through that. And in fact, that program is still operational right now.
That's terrific. That's terrific. That's terrific. We're going to move in a moment to our wrap-up section. We still have time. John, do we have another question?
Yes. Just wanted Chris to share information about the United Way campaign this year, and being the most critical campaign ever, if he could speak to that.
Sure, happy to do so. Certainly, I don't think there's a single person on this call that could question whether or not the needs exist in our community today. I think we've seen that over the last 6 months, especially. The spotlight has been put on what the need is in this community. We have more people out of work than we did before. One of the realities of this pandemic is we have more kids that are behind in school than we did just 6 months ago, because of the gap that existed for them, the learning gap that has existed for them. And here for all these years, we've talked about the impact of things like the summer slide on a child's ability to learn. Well, guess what? We experienced an extended summer slide. And so hats off to our school systems right now, and the way that they are stepping forward to make sure that kids' needs are met, and all the things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, because we couldn't do it without them. And one of the ways that we support the solutions to those needs is through the annual United Way campaign. And we know we've had some businesses that have been negatively impacted. And as I've told our staff team here, we know we're in a crisis. We know that we've gone through a crisis and we're still in it. We know that there is severe need in our community. And if we don't find a way to lead now, then when will we find a way to lead? And that's kind of been our message internally. And our team is leaning in, doing it with as much strength as they can, and trying to engage as many people as they can, because ultimately, outside of government funding, one of the largest funders of community solutions is United Way, not only in this community but across our country. So if we have weakness there, we have crisis in our community, we will continue to fall behind. And we've got to find a way to come together as a community and address that and put the strongest result forward that we possibly can. for the right reasons. And that's about
Chris,
changing the community.
yeah. We're going to move now to the wrap-up section, and I'd like to bring you into the conversation. By the way, thank you. I think we've all learned so much, and again, on behalf of the community, our appreciation to you, the entire United Way staff, and United Way has lots of volunteers. Thank you to the United Way family for being there for us. And you are helping really respond to twin crises. One is COVID, and the other is social injustice. And in both ways, United Way is leading and leading with pride. One of the things I really like about United Way, as much as anyone, you bring our community together. You know, community from different parts of the city, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And when we talk about collaborate like your life depends on it, that's what United Way is all about. And that's rallying together donors, volunteers, and partners. And we need that spirit now more than ever. That's your cue.
No doubt, no doubt. What I would tell you on this, Jim, is as I think about who we are in our essence as an organization, you know, we exist to bring people and organizations together to address our community's most critical issues. That is why we exist as an organization. That is what we will be focused on. That is what we will try to accomplish as an organization. And so as an organization, we'll focus on the issues that affect the most people in our community in the biggest ways, and we'll bring people together to develop solutions around that and hopefully meet their philanthropic aspirations as well. People want to do good in our community, and that's one of the things that, you know, we will do collectively with others.
Chris, if there was one thing I was hearing you repeat, was the need for every nonprofit board and management group to get together and really focus. You might not be able to do everything. What are your core priorities? Focus on those essentials, particularly things that you can do that other nonprofits can't. And then we said collaborate like your life depended on it. And there's so many nonprofits that share common goals. And what a great basis to come together and talk.
No doubt, no doubt. And we, you know, that's certainly, as I think about, you know, one of the things that we've done through our new funding process, and you think about how bringing people together around common goals, what that looks like, you know, through our Impact Council work, we are bringing all those organizations that we are funding throughout each one of our Impact Councils. We're bringing them together on a regular basis so that they can learn from one another, so that they can discuss how it is that they're contributing to the common goals, how we can discuss how we can do even greater things for our community by bringing more organizations together. So collaboration is critical. We know that. We went into this knowing that, and doing it based on those focused goals is also, you know, certainly one of the things that we've made clearly a focus for us over the course of the last 2 years.
You know, in collaboration, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone I know in nonprofit, they're there to touch, improve, and save a life. And the truth is, there are so many efficiencies that we can share when we collaborate. And we're not here to perpetuate organizations. We're here to touch, lift, and save more lives.
Yes, no doubt, and collaboration is not only from a provider perspective, but also from a funder perspective, right? It's coming together as an entire community to agree on what's important, and then find our roles in making that happen, to make change happen in those areas, and ultimately how we impact the people that live right next door to us. Ultimately, that's what we're all in this to do.
Yeah.
And if we do it together, we're far better off.
Right. You know, you've talked about how teleconferencing has changed our lives. Are we seeing virtual volunteering coming into place?
Great question. And, early on in the pandemic, we had a number of our corporate partners that came to us and asked us about virtual volunteer opportunities. So we really had to start to work with our partners. As you can imagine, at that moment in time, so many of our partners were trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to keep our doors open, right? How are we going to make sure that we serve our clients? And now we're asking them to create virtual volunteer opportunities. But we were able to do that. We were able to provide some opportunities and did that and offer those up through the website. And as a result, we were able to connect people. And so it was, part of what this crisis has forced us to do is to really think differently about what volunteering means, what one-on-one face-to-face meetings mean. And so the same held true for thinking about virtual volunteer opportunities.
Yeah, you mentioned the word summer slide. And I think that mentoring, virtual technology lends itself perfectly to mentoring because the summer slide has been longer than summer long. Couldn't be more timely. You were talking about the difference of San Antonio. There are other cities with higher per capita income. There are other cities with more corporate 500 companies. But we're amazed how generous San Antonians are. They are generous beyond their means. What's your experience been?
No doubt about it. Certainly to have a community of this size, if you think about all the money that's raised in this community, and to have a community of this size support the work that happens in this community is pretty incredible. There aren't, I would imagine that we collectively raise more than a number of cities that are larger than us. Couldn't tell you the exact number of that. I will tell you from a United Way perspective, we're one of the largest United Ways in the country. We're a top 10 United Way in the country, and so from a size perspective, so yeah, I mean, very generous people. We saw that with the pandemic, right? People immediately leaned in and said, "I want to help. How do I help?" And and that was our early experience. People wanted to find a way to help and wanted to find a way to engage.
And our fundraising tip is, that our job is to build and nurture relationships. I like to say friendships. And that continues to be our job. We just have to do it through technology and virtually. And we are hearing positive results all around the country, raising gifts of all amounts through teleconferencing. It's very encouraging. And I think the way you do it, I don't know what you treat your donors like family. What are we doing? I have family members in Boston, I'm checking in. How are you doing? I tell them how we're doing. Is there anything I can do to help? I think that's the way nonprofits should reach out to their donors. Check how they're doing, tell them how your nonprofit's doing, and ask if there's any way you can help. I mean, I hate to be stereotypical, but a lot of donors are a little older. And I love the way that development officers have been helping their donors become more comfortable with video conferencing and holding their hands, which will not only improve the relationship with the nonprofit, but will help the donor improve the quality of relationship with children, grandchildren, and friends around the country. The point is, too, I'm going to say here, Chris, we are all suffering from computer screen fatigue. A lot of things I'm doing now, after I've Zoom called someone 8 times, I give them the option. Do we just want to make it an audio call? It doesn't have to all be Zoom. But we should recognize that we have never been in front of those computer screens as much as we have now. And I always like to say, nothing beats the personal touch and we are emailing and texting and Zooming like we've never done before. My personal favorite is the old-fashioned handwritten note, because you can keep, how many handwritten notes do you get? And you can keep that. My advice to nonprofits, sure, use technology to communicate and convey your thanks to your donors, but don't forget the power of a handwritten note. I'm calling this Chris's Golden Nuggets. United Way is ready to assist individuals and organizations. San Antonians are generous beyond their means. And I'll say it again, nonprofits, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And don't take your foot off the gas pedal. You should not stop identifying prospects, cultivating prospects, asking them for the gifts, and particularly thank them for the gifts, because philanthropy is proven to be very resilient. And again, this might surprise some of you, but philanthropy is actually responding more strongly to COVID than it did during the recession of 08 and 09. There are plenty of positive signs. And I like to say too, to all you nonprofits, if there's a way you can brighten the day of your donor, do so. I know someone, I have a development officer friend who makes the world's best chocolate chip cookies. So she's doing drop-off service where she puts it, her great cookies at the doorstep of the donor. She pounds on the window, it's contact-free. Find something you can do to brighten their day, because, you know, there is breakthrough on the other side, and through the United Way and all the nonprofits that make up 6,000 nonprofits in San Antonio, we are working our way to a brighter future. Chris, I give a money-back guarantee at all my webinars and workshops. The more you ask, the more you get. Can you back that up?
There you go. I'm with you. I'll stand with you on that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And finally, whoops, I like to close with a statement I got. Ooh, maybe I won't close with it. This is my favorite quote. It's from President John F. Kennedy delivering the commencement address at American University on June 10th, 1963. It gives me goosebumps, Chris, because I swear he's talking to us right now, September 23, 2020. And he reminded us that the most basic common link is we all inhabit the small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. And I just think he was speaking to us right now. And Chris, I want to extend our thanks again to you for joining us over this hour, but your lifetime of leadership to the United Way. And also, please extend our deep appreciation to your team and your supporters and your volunteers. You all make San Antonio the place it is. So thank you for your leadership. We've never needed it more. And I want to thank our producer, John Largent. John, we usually give you 1 or 2 glasses of wine to do the editing that's necessary. And then we plan to post the tape and recording on LinkedIn and Facebook somewhere between 6 to 6:30. So John, thank you. Chris, thank you so much. It's been a great hour, but thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thanks.
Okay, and to everyone, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.